Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for choosing to spend this afternoon with us. I speak in the name of a trio with Dr. Adalgisa Giorgio from the University of Bath and Professor Claire Williams from the University of Oxford, if you want to give a wave. The three of us, as you might know, have been organizing a series of events for the CCWW, which is the Center for the Study of Contemporary Women's Writing. And we've had the wonderful help of Kathy Collins, that can give a wave as well, and Jenny, who work at the Centre. The Centre is part of the Institute for Languages, Cultures and Society, based in Senate House in London and part of the School of Advanced Studies. And we're running an entire series that started in March and it will end in November on the business of contemporary women's writing and reading communities today. As some of you might know, we've already had a launching conference in March where we started looking at the business of women's writing from idea to the global shelf. We'll have another closing conference in November, so keep an eye on that. We're going to be focusing more on translation and criticism on that one. And we'll have another online workshop on the 18th of September, also on Zoom. And in that one, we're going to be focusing on reading communities for kids and young adults. So today we're focusing for reading communities for adults in the digital era. And we've got a fantastic host of speakers that will share their experiences. As you will have seen from the program, we've got quite a few speakers, so we're going to be very tight on time, but we do want to give everybody the opportunity to ask questions and to have a lovely discussion at the end. Because we've got so many speakers, sort of one after the other, what we've created is this pad, which is essentially a pad, a sort of a communal pad that as the conversation is happening, as the presentations are happening, you can take notes or write your questions so that you don't forget them. We're testing this for the first time. The reason why we wouldn't want to take the notes in the chat is because they ping. So every time, obviously, we don't want to bother our speakers. Some of them are using slides, so they might not see what's happening. So if you want to write down your questions, and then we can sort of look at the pad as well and sort of take it from there. As you know, the session is being recorded. Now, during the presentations, even if you turn your camera on, which would be lovely for the presenters, you won't be filmed on the recording. However, during the Q&A, if your camera is turned on, then obviously you will appear on the recording. If you don't want to appear on the recording, then turn your camera off, mute yourself, and you can put the question in the chat. Or if you want the question to be anonymous, you can send it to me in the chat and I will read it out for you. Similarly, when people are presenting, just mute yourself so there's no, ambulances or noises kind of in the background interfering. And I think that is the sort of the introduction, the housekeeping. It's an immense joy to see so many of you here. It's a very sunny afternoon here. So if it is the same for you, I'm really grateful that you chose to spend it with us online. And I will, without further ado, I will start with our first speaker. And for each speaker, I will read out a short biography. But what I do recommend is that you look up all of our speakers because they've done some amazing stuff with reading groups and beyond. So our first speaker is Professor Jenny Hartley, OBE, Emeritus Professor and co-founder of Prison Reading Groups and author of the Reading Groups book published with Oxford University Press 2003 and a personal favourite of mine. So thank you so much, Jenny, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Great. Okay, so thank you so much for this invitation to join this very interesting group. I'm really flattered. And for this opportunity to talk about prison reading groups, which has been a huge and rewarding part of my life for more than 25 years. To start with, though, I'd like to talk a bit about the characteristics of the reading community of the prison generally, of the whole prison, not just the groups. And I'll get onto the groups in a minute. And why I want to talk about the whole prison as a reading community is because of a survey, as it just so happens, that I've just been doing about reading in prison. And this is a survey conducted at the beginning of this year. And I asked prison librarians for the top 6 favourite authors being read in prisons recently. And we got replies from more than 50 prisons, which is great. And just very briefly, what we've got is one front runner, one author way out in front, and that's Lee Child. Is that a name familiar to you? I can see some nods there. Great. Okay. So he's thriller, action, quite violent, one good man and a gun, basically. Margaret Drabble's a great fan of his, which I found quite surprising. Importantly, it's a series, and series do very well in prisons. And I think people who are not habitual readers really like series for obvious reasons. But coming quite near the top of favourites I was interested to see Frida McFadden. And it must be men reading her too, because there are far more men's prisons than women's prisons. I think women only account for about 10% of the prison estate, and in the UK anyway. And men often tell us that they prefer non-fiction to fiction, and that they prefer male authors to female authors. But here's Frida McFadden, the housemaid. I'm sorry, I haven't got any slides, but I've got visual. And McFadden is a huge bestseller at the moment in the UK. Anyway, she had 8 books in the Sunday Times bestseller top 50. I mean, that's huge in last year. She's been adapted for films. I don't know if you've seen, I think it's The House, this one. She's really prolific. They're psychological thrillers. I'll just read you the first sentence of The Housemaid. It gives you an idea. If I leave this house, it will be in handcuffs. I mean, how could you not read on? That's that's your. So and for me, there's a very nice, a very striking parallel here with a survey of prison reading, which was done in this country over a century ago in 1911. And this is partly why I've done the survey, because I wanted to compare. And this survey was done when Winston Churchill was Home Secretary. He commissioned it, a report on books available in prisons at the time. And when things were very different then, but I won't go to that. So the report ended with a survey of prisoners' favourite authors. So that's why I wanted to compare. And right at the top of their list was Mrs. Henry Wood. And she wrote what was then known as sensation fiction. I don't know if Mrs. Henry Wood is a name that resonates at all now. East Lynne was her most favourite. And it was a huge success. I mean, it was published 50 years before that survey was done. So you can see what longevity that book had. She, like McFadden, was very prolific. She was very, very popular. Like McFadden, she was much adapted onto stage and screen. And like McFadden's book, it's a world of very twisty, domestic, psychological stuff. The secret skeleton genre is how Wood herself described it. And again, in 1911, she would have been popular with male readers because, again, most of these prisoners were male, which is surprising. And if I come back to the 2026 list, McFadden isn't the only female writer on this list of favourites. There's also Martina Cole, again, thrillers. There's J.K. Rowling, which I'm sure won't surprise you, Kimberly Chambers, Christine Finn, and the big shift, which many prison librarians commented on, was how popular fantasy has become. Many of them comment on this as a new development, and I guess that's the Harry Potter, Game of Thrones dividend. And again, the series is a huge draw. And the other striking thing I noticed about the lists, about the reading in the prison period, is a long tail. The books on authors, which are mentioned by only one library in our survey as being popular. A fantastic diversity here, from something like 1,000 record covers, that's a nice big Taschen book, to Machiavelli. And you think, well, what's going on here? And I think what's going on with this only in one prison statistic is it suggests that prisoners must be talking about books. They must be recommending, sharing recommends, sharing likes, book chat going across the whole community of the prison, which I find very heartening. I mean, some of these men may be locked up for up to 23 hours a day. When they get out for a chance to talk, which is called association time, books will be there as part of the conversation. So that's in the prison generally. So inside our groups, obviously a lot of book talk. And so I'll talk a bit about what they're like and how they started. And they started way back in 1999 in the survey that Sarah Turvey and I did. And it struck us that this might go well, groups might go well in a prison setting. And at that time, my brother-in-law was a chaplain in the prison, so he helped me set it up. And we needed a bit of money for the books. And so I approached Surrey Education Authority, and the woman there said, yeah, I'll give you some money, but would you start one in a women's prison as well? So I said, yeah, fine. So I started one at HMP Send, which is a women's prison, and I was there for 25 years. It was a great pleasure. And now we have I think we're in about 70 or whatever groups, prisons across the country with about 100 groups. We're facilitated by volunteers. and usually with the help of the librarians. And if you visit our website, Prison Reading Groups, we're supported by the charity Give a Book, which has been terrific. And the main point about our groups for their members is that they're all voluntary. So this is reading for pleasure. This is a big thing. It's not therapy, although, of course, it may be therapeutic. And we like to be at a distance from education because for many people, education may have been problematic, and not gone well for various reasons. So it's a big thing that we're about pleasure and we're about choice. Groups choose what they read because, as you can imagine, in prison, you don't get much choice. So it's important that here's somewhere where you do. And it has to be by a democratic process, which can take a while. We bring in single copies. People in the groups make suggestions, whatever, we vote. One of the rules is that it must be in paperback because group members get a free copy, a nice new paperback. And that's nice, isn't it? We'll know how nice it is to hold a new paperback in our hands. And publishers have been very generous to us with this, Penguin Random House in particular. So this is your book to keep. You can pass it down the wing. You can maybe pass it on to a family member or a friend or something, maybe your daughter. And we know that people do this. So books then become conversational currency. When you're in prison, you don't have much news to pass on, as you can imagine. So his mum reads alongside, that sort of thing. Inside the group, the only rule I like to have is no interruptions, no sidebar conversations. Conversations can get quite heated, but learning how to disagree and still being civil, it's an important skill, isn't it? And this is what men often comment on. And you do get a flavour. This is a prison newspaper called Inside Time. We have a column in there once a month. It gives you some idea of how we talk about books. But I like to say, every group is different. So it'll have its own identity, its own ways of reading and talking. Which is, what I like about it. So looking at Sandra's prompt questions for this workshop, how do different communities read? Well, for these groups, I would say with intensity. These groups mean a lot to their members. They don't always come every time because they're unpredictable, they're unreliable. That's just what, it's not their strong suit. But you can see how much they mean. If I show you, for instance, some of these feedback forms, which we did during lockdown, and they're incredibly detailed. People have taken tremendous trouble. That comes from a women's group in the SEND group I was telling you about. It was a really laborious process to get all that feedback, but they really, went for it, put a lot of effort into it. So you can see how book chat is important. And I think these groups can be a spur to reading and to finishing a book. They're very good for reading stamina. Some of these members of these groups are not habitual readers. They're not very. Some of them are, extremely fluent and whatever, and some of them are not just at all. And often people say they read much more when they're in prison. This is the first novel I've ever read. It's quite a common thing to say. Some of them have actually learned to read in prison as well. Prisons are good for that. And as for book groups everywhere, you get to read stuff you wouldn't choose for yourself. And we all know what a challenge that is. There's a huge range of different groups. Some for those who can't read, as I've said, there are read aloud or read round groups on mental health wings, groups for family days where a parent can share a book with the child who then takes it home, that sort of thing. About Sandra's other questions, the one about social media, well, this isn't really an issue, although one librarian told me that anything on BookTok goes well, which I found interesting. Obviously, that's suggestions, I imagine, coming in from outside. The gender dynamics of the group, which is another of Sandra's questions. Well, these are all single-sex groups, obviously. But what's surprising to me is how much the men are enjoying these twisted domestic stuff books. In my mental health group, which meets weekly at the moment, they really have got into story in a big way, which has surprised me. It's quite a fluid group. You never know who's going to come. They come and go. For various reasons. So we do extracts, we do poems, short stories, whatever. But we also do a book that carries on from week to week. It's usually something called a quick read. Here's one, The Donut. Okay, you see that one? So it's short, it's 100 pages or so. And this one was suggested to me by a member of one of my other groups, a chap And I thought, oh no, it's too girly. He said, no, it's great. And he was right, it was. I would never have thought, it seems to me this was written clearly with a female audience in mind. But what the men love, well, they like multiple narrators, unreliable narrators, nasty narrators. This is the sort of thing that, and altogether it's about the power of story, it seems to me. And I'd be interested to see how that picks up with our other, what other people have found. And then just to finish with, I've been talking mainly about fiction because fiction is mainly what our groups read. And on the whole, they don't really distinguish much about the gender of the author, certainly much less than I would expect. And that has been commented on by the group facilitators in our survey that doesn't make that much difference. But there is non-fiction as well in our list and in the groups. And the biggest category of non-fiction is self-help books. And again, the gender of the author doesn't seem to be particularly important. Well, that's to say, the most significant self-help author for both men and women is someone called Rhonda Byrne, who has a whole series called The Secret and The Secret this and that, huge bestsellers. And they just, they're really, really popular. And self-help, yes, I've read about it, men and women do choose that in their reading groups occasionally and like to talk about it. I'm doing one next week called The Celestial Prophecy or something. Eat, Pray, Love. Do you remember this was popular a few years ago? Elizabeth Gilbert, woman rich New Yorker trying to find meaning in her life. I think she has addiction issues. And I thought that, the women chose it at Send. I thought they would find her privileged, entitled. I found her intensely annoying. They were so much more generous, so much more tolerant. And I just was so surprised. And I think, they were willing to take her on her own terms. And not, and I just thought that to me, each time it's always, I can never predict, which is what I love about it. And the last point I want to make, which is really what you find again and again in these communities of what I call non-habitual readers, is this openness, this freshness of response, a sort of unguardedness, I would describe, which just makes reading with them so rewarding and such a privilege. So I'm glad to have had the chance to be able to share that with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for this. This was wonderful and such a fantastic way to get us started and to sort of get our ideas going. And I know that people have questions, but we're going to keep them at the end and sort of build those bridges between all our speakers. And our second speaker is Helen Patuck, writer and illustrator working at the intersection of storytelling, translation, and community practice, founder of Kitabna, Our Book, and ILCS, the first ILCS creative practitioner in residence. Over to you, Helen.
Thanks very much, Sandra, for that introduction. And Jenny, it was so fascinating to listen to all those insights. I think we're so lucky that we got to get that snapshot of reading interests and how these spaces are formulated and formed in prison. So thanks so much. Sandra, I just want to say, I know we don't have much time, so please feel free. I'm pretty sure this is 10 minutes, but if it's not, please feel free to interrupt me. I do have a presentation just to make things a bit visual. I'll just bring that up now. Okay. Is that okay, Sandra?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so thanks so much for inviting me. And it's really nice to see Kathy here as well. I just became the first creative practitioner in residence at the ILCS. And it's been wonderful this kind of first week. Actually already meeting people and discovering their curiosities and reading desires. Some of which have led to amazing research projects and outputs. And I've been thinking about the phrase reading community and how we imagine it in quite narrow, even academic ways sometimes, maybe a book group, seminars, libraries. But in my experience, and as we've already heard from Jenny, speaking on prisons, reading communities have emerged in places not always recognised as literary spaces at all. refugee camps, ESOL classrooms, museum workshops, community gardens, even women's swimming groups. And I want to begin and bring a simple proposition, which is maybe a bit simplistic, but that reading spaces can be understood as frameworks of care. So not only places where we interpret text together, but places where we interpret each other and ourselves, where we practice attention, reciprocity, and belonging. So somewhere between solitude and solidarity reflects a tension I keep returning to, which is that reading often begins in solitude, but it also strains a lot towards solidarity, towards shared meaning, recognition, and companionship. So my own relationship to reading communities began quite traditionally in English literature seminars at university. And speaking of not quite so contemporary women writers, I first encountered Mary Shelley's Frankenstein at university, and I became very struck by its central question: what happens to someone who is born into this world and denied recognition, and also who is considered monstrous and therefore acceptable to exclude under those conditions? And at the same time, I was discovering post-colonial literature, writers from former British colonies, exposing the European colonial project in really stunning English prose and very finely crafted novels, weaved with a subversive power Salman Rushdie called The Empire Writes Back in the 1980s. And I really started to understand reading as a way of perceiving power and of recognizing voices that had been marginalized or erased. So coming back to our theme of reading groups, especially those that can be held online too, after graduating, I moved to Geneva to work as an editor in a small publishing house based in Switzerland. And there I met fellow writers who would form one of my earliest reading groups, which survives to this day. So we started out in 2012 in the Société de Lecture, which is pictured here. Of course, we were in person then, but as the years evolved, it became online. And I don't know if any of you remember Skype, which is now a historic entity. You could basically, if you were on Skype, you could do this thing called Together Mode, where it would basically replace your call with a background. And this was something that brought us quite a lot of joy. So in 2012, we started out as a writers group. We were reading each other's work, encouraging each other to enter competitions. And now we mostly share book recommendations and writing news in some cases. Some of us have gone on to write novels and things. So there's always some news to talk about. But back in Geneva, another reading group found me too. So I knew that Frankenstein itself had been written in a reading group of sorts in Geneva. Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, Lord Byron and John Polidori had been having a ghost story competition, so a writing competition of their own, in the Villa Diodati, which is on Lake Geneva. And that's where Mary Shelley first came up with the idea. So Frankenstein had been written in Geneva, and Frankenstein was next on the reading list of a public community book group called the International Book Group of Geneva. And they met in a cafe every other week. So I joined, and I even volunteered myself to present the book. And through that book group, I found myself in conversation with other book clubbers who, when they weren't reading novels, were working at the International Committee of the Red Cross, who were delegates who'd worked overseas, or people who had come to work in Geneva to represent their country at the UN. And I encountered the very complex and painful realities of conflict and of people and states denied recognition. And through getting to know them, those book clubbers, it kind of completely opened up worlds for me. I started to learn French and Arabic, which led me to Beirut for Arabic school. And then when I was in Beirut, I somehow read my way into the world of international humanitarianism, in which I built a career for over a decade now, with my organisation Kitabna, which means our book in Arabic, which was founded back there in Lebanon in 2014 with Syrian friends and teachers. So Kitabna means our book in Arabic, and this initiative started in Arabic school with Lebanese, Syrian, German and British friends who love books. So it was a kind of international book group of sorts, again, a reading group, but we were reading to learn. And by writing and illustrating a book called The Giant Watermelon, I became part of an informal emergency education movement called No Lost Generation. And it was determined to meet the needs of teachers primarily, who did not have schools to teach children in. Recognizing the ability of a book to create a classroom of sorts shaped my later work of the next 10 years in Gaza, Israel, Syria, Jordan, Turkey, Iraq, Northern Ireland, Poland, and Armenia. Hugely different contexts, hugely different cultures, but in all places, I found reading spaces. And I worked later with the UN, writing and illustrating children's books to help adults share mental health advice with children in emergencies. And these are all shared primarily in the digital space. So often reading has blurred into writing and co-creation. And teachers didn't only read books, they wrote them and made them with children too. And this shift is important for me because storytelling was not only about representation in these projects, it was about presence and the right to appear, not just in the world, but in your community, to speak and be listened to. So a conversation about a novel in a university seminar or a reading group actually for me became a lifetime of conversations about care. And that experience of collective reading has really stayed with me because it suggested that reading communities can be civic spaces too, and places where social imagination is formed. And through this work, I worked in Poland and I discovered longer feminist traditions of such spaces, including the circles around 18th century Polish novelist Natascha who formed reading circles, which she called entuzjastki, or the enthusiasts. Yes, this is really fascinating for me. Where reading together was inseparable from imagining new forms of economic life for women as thinkers and writers. And in our own time, Polish novelist Olga Tokarczuk, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, has established a whole foundation which runs events throughout Poland promoting values of free speech, democracy, equality, and human rights. So I think she's an incredibly inspiring novelist because she not only has she reached the highest kind of, I don't know what novelists generally aspire towards, but I think winning the Nobel Prize for Literature is pretty up there. But she uses that influence to reach beyond her readership, beyond the people who might usually read her novels, to create reading spaces and spaces for discussion and dialogue. And I think that's just wonderful as an artist, but also someone who wants their art to be lived and their visions to be, to really touch people. I guess now I'm back at Senate House, I'm kind of reminiscing a lot about my time at SOAS where I did my master's, and I definitely joined a feminist reading group that I really enjoyed. And afterwards I set up a feminist reading group called the Bloomsbury Witches. And we were kind of exploring questions around patriarchy and the treatment of those considered others, generally, other. And these sessions felt very much like laboratories of thought and solidarity, where we could talk about things that are just wrong. The fact that witchcraft was a crime, just as homosexuality was a crime once upon a time. And all the different thinking and thoughts that go into these systems of oppression. And I think having that solidarity and having a place where actually you could meet other people who also were concerned, not just about what happened in the past, but about how these trends continue, was a different kind of formula of reading group for me. I think it was very much moving towards a kind of the intimacy of knowing other people, share your concerns about things that are deeply concerning. And then since moving back to my native Somerset, I saw there's someone from Taunton in here. I'm in Glastonbury most of the time. I've been part of LGBTQ plus reading groups in rural areas where literature often carries a different kind of recognition. Because for many queer people, intimacy and selfhood are first encountered through books, films and music. And I know that experience is shared, which is why I set up a book group last year, and called Open Book Group, and I joined one too. Two very different styles. One was very much in someone's house, it was very private, and another one was very public and open to all. open book. And a book space also becomes a signal too for, people who have kept something inside or don't feel necessarily safe to share their deepest experiences or challenging experiences. And I noticed that it became very much a peer support group as well over time, which was great to see. And then lastly, I just want to say that I also run ESOL book groups in rural Somerset, and it was great to hear Jenny talking about the sort of, I use the Penguin Easy Reader, the kind of shortened abridged versions of novels by Kate Moss, and just novels that you'd love your learners to read. It's wonderful that they have abridged versions that you can use, and you can run a book group format in that way. I've certainly done it. And it's really nice actually to be able to kind of connect with people on themes and in a more literary way, but with resources that have reduced that kind of complexity for people who haven't pursued education or literacy to a certain level. So yeah, also coming back to that question, how do different communities read? Very differently. That's, as in all things, it's complex, very differently. But I think differently informed, but often with very shared desires to connect and for dialogue, for belonging. And yeah, if anyone is interested in coming along, for example, to any of my conversation series at the ILCS, they're completely free. I'll put some links in the chat. I've made a kind of list of links if anyone wants to pursue any of this. But over May, July, I'll be running a conversation series, just 2 hours long, a bit like this, twice a month, to discuss different ways we can listen better to each other and communities. So thanks for listening to me now, and I look forward to listening to the rest of this call.
Thank you so much, Helen. That was wonderful and made us think about, reading and care. So from, the intensity that Jenny spoke about and looking at care. So thank you so much, and do register for Helen's workshops because they're going to be great. And I'm going to move on swiftly to our third speaker, who is James Hadley, who is Usher Associate Professor in Literary Translation at Trinity College Dublin. He's also the Director of the Trinity Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation and Director of Trinity's MPhil in Literary Translation. So it's over to you, James.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. So as the very observant among you will notice, I'm not Ethna McCartney-Bowen. That's because Ethna's been preparing for this for quite some time, and then at the last minute she's not been able to join us. So I'm the imposter today, and so I hope you'll bear with me. I'm only the director, and Ethna really is the expert on this subject. So I'll try and do my best on her behalf. So we have, at Trinity, we have this Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation, which was set up originally around 20-something years ago. And for a long time, it was kind of a notional, not really a centre in any kind of physical sense. It was a set of people across the university who happened to have an interest in translation, who would come together to share their ideas. But thanks to a very persuasive person who was our founding director called Sarah Smith, it actually formed into a physical building, which is where I am now. It's a very grand, nice Edwardian townhouse. And one of the first initiatives that Sarah did was to set up our reading group, book club, which has been running ever since. And so she started off by she started off by inviting people who she knew. So people from inside the university who would be interested in reading books with her. And the only really binding feature of these books was that they had to be translated. So they had to have been translated into English. And I've just neglected to mention on the first slide there, which you can see, and I was just ignoring. We are of course, Trinity College Dublin. We're in the middle of Dublin, and we're part of the School of Languages, Literatures and Cultural Studies. And this year, we're celebrating 250 years of teaching modern languages. We were the first university in the world to establish chairs in modern languages in 1776. I don't remember that very well myself. And then our mission in the centre is we develop, promote and support literary translation around the world. We started off as I said, as kind of a collection of like-minded souls. And then we've developed into our mission statement says we're the reference point for literary and cultural translation now. So we teach master students, and we have PhD programs and postdoctoral researchers, and lots of translators come and visit us. And we also do lots and lots of public events with writers and translators from all over the world. We do book launches, literary readings, research seminars. But really the thing that has been going ever since we began was the book club, which Ethna now runs. Sarah having retired and sadly passed away a few weeks ago. So Ethna now chooses books which have been recently translated into English. So before it used to be just anything that was translated, but Ethna is very, very good at curating the works that people read as part of the book club. So she'll choose things which have been translated recently, but I think they could have been published at any point. So sometimes you have works which have been around for a while, but they've only just been translated into English. And they meet once a month. And it's normally, we try and make it like the second Tuesday in the month or the third Thursday in the month, something like that, to make it as easy for people to remember as possible. And it's in the evening here. So between 6:30 and 7:30 in the evening. And we're very careful to time all of our events actually around when people are likely to actually come. When Sarah first started off the centre and the book club, it was really for people inside Trinity. And at some point we had this discussion, like, why are we doing it? Why are we being so exclusive? And at that point, we really changed everything that we did, because we stopped talking to ourselves and we just opened the doors to anybody who'd like to come to any of our events. And we shifted also our mission in doing that, because we stopped just saying, oh, translation isn't that fantastic, and started showing people who maybe have never thought about translation and what it means, like how a translated book might be different from a non-translated book. We started welcoming those people in, and then they started coming in more and more numbers, and then coming again. So that was really encouraging. So with our book club, there's no membership, and people are welcome to drop by or not, so they can come to as many or as few sessions as they like. We advertise that the book club is coming up months in advance, so that people can sign up, and then they get a message to say, join us. So they know which book we're going to read in which month and on which day, and then they can take as long as they like to get to that point. They don't have to pay, of course, and we really focus very carefully on having an informal discussion. The reason I mentioned that we're in a grand Georgian house is because Trinity College Dublin tends to carry a certain image among people, especially in Dublin. And we used to have people saying, oh, I'd love to come to the event. I find it fascinating, but I'm not a scholar. I'm not able to go to that kind of thing. And we just hate that. We hate that image. So we do our best to try and throw off the expectations in terms of who is allowed and who's welcome. So we make everybody welcome, and we try to stress that, like, in every time that we advertise our events, we stress, like, everybody's welcome, and everyone's welcome to speak as well, or not, as they prefer. We do our discussions in English. Of course, people come from all over the world now. Like, we have regular members from Australia and the US, and many from continental Europe, and then quite a sizable number from Ireland and the UK, of course. And people are welcome to read the book either in English or in any other language. So sometimes we have people who've read the book in the source language. So if it's a book translated from German, they've read it in German. And then Ethna just loves them, because she can then ask them, I noticed this little thing in the text, and how is it in German? And that really creates a very rich discussion. She, as I said, she's brilliant at curating them. So she looks for literary merit. She wants, yeah, as I said, books from any period, but they have to have been translated in the last 3 years or so. She's very careful at choosing books which are, I think she chooses books which are below 300 pages, and I think ideally below 200 pages, because she recognizes that people often, if they feel daunted by a book, then they won't get through it. And she really wants people to have at least kind of had a good stab at the book. She chooses very carefully different countries and different languages as she's going along. So she doesn't want to linger too long on any particular part of the world. And she also chooses a wide range of different genre. And she also makes sure, like, she does so much work, but she tries to make sure that the books are available in local public libraries. Which is not always. She has been sometimes phoning up the libraries and saying, can you get those books? Because we really want to read them. So far, she's got through 79 books in 31 languages. That's 51 countries that are represented. And she's done a little breakdown there. These are her slides. I can't take any praise at all for the slides. So she has done a gender balance analysis there, but those are of the writers and the translators. We don't take demographic information about the people who come to our book club, partly because we want to make it as accessible as possible, and we just want people to just come and enjoy themselves in an informal context. But she's noticed that we have about 42 male writers, 35 female writers, and 2 others, 1 anonymous. We have, as far as translators are concerned, 35 male, 47 female, 1 anonymous. I don't think it was planned that way, but she's ended up with more male writers and more female translators. I don't think that was conscious at all. I think she chose the books mainly based on like those other factors. She's mentioned there that subject matter like war, migration, and loss keeps coming up, especially with the various world events, let's put it that way, that keep happening around the world. Topics tend to come up, and she likes to try and explore those themes inside the book club. I should say that when we first started the book club, it was an in-person thing in the building. And then just before the pandemic, we said, if we're trying to make this as open as possible, why don't we move it onto Zoom? And that was a good thing to do because, of course, during the pandemic, we couldn't have met together. But then after the pandemic, we built such an international audience that we said, actually, let's just keep it online. So actually, there's nobody in person in our building at all, apart from Ethna. And everyone is joining us from around the world on Zoom. Just now they're on 3rd Tuesdays in the month. At the beginning they were the 3rd Tuesdays in the month, and they were in person. And as she says there, they were mostly founding directors, friends, and colleagues. But after the pandemic, we stayed online. The readership increased massively. Like originally, we'd probably expect to have 3 or 4 people in the book club each time, and now, it's somewhere between 12 and 20, depending on the book. And she has a core group there of about 40 people who come, maybe not every single time, but they come regularly. And then there's an awful lot of people who drop by and then we don't see them again, or not for a long time. A lot of people are retirees, especially some people who are former staff of Trinity, but there's also postgraduate students, alumni, and general public. But when she says general public there, that's obviously very, very broad. And there's a lot of people who are involved maybe in cultural associations or people who have nothing to do with translation, and they're just interested in reading something a bit different. Also, as you may know, Dublin is very, very international just now. And so even from the people who are inside Dublin, we tend to get just an enormous number of first languages. So it's not the case that most people are reading in English and they speak only English. They tend to speak many different languages. Oh, she's given us a little advertisement there. So the next meeting, please come, is on the 12th of May, and it's Forgottenness, which she's focusing on there, which is translated from the Ukrainian by Zelena Tomkins. And as she says there, and as we say in all of our advertisements, everybody's welcome and admission is free. And you can find more information at that link just there. So I think that may be me. It is indeed.
Thank you so much, James, for telling us about the centre's work and for stepping in so wonderfully for Etna. I think she would be very proud. You're definitely sharing your other slide. There we go. Perfect. Thank you so much. That was brilliant. And hopefully people will join as well. We've already got a big plan for you guys to join other events, so that's wonderful. And I'll go straight with our next speaker, who is Professor Francesca Calamita, Associate Professor at the University of Virginia in the USA and Visiting Professor at Unistrasse in Siena, Italy. She is the author of Ti trovo cambiata, published this year by Enciclopedia delle Donne, which is a book about Italian women today, and it was based on 400 interviews that explore, among other things, what they read. Over to you, Francesca.
Thank you, Sandra, for this lovely invitation and introduction, as well as to Adalgisa and Claire. And thanks to all of you who are here with us tonight, talking about these very interesting topics. As Sandra was said, I'm going to give you some data today about what Italian women currently read. Of course, data limited to my research that you can find in Ti trovo cambiata. Ti trovo cambiata literally means I find you changed, or maybe better, you have changed. And that would be a translation which a bit more of sense, let's say that. But literally, I find you changed. And it inspired to another book written in 1959, Italian Women Confess, Le Italiane si confessano, by Italian journalist Gabriella Parca. I don't know if you ever came across this, but it's a book with the voice of women at the time. Gabriella Parca did a lot of research and actually selected 300 letters from advice column of Too Popular magazine, and she was in charge of this advice column. And from these letters, Italian women were talking about family life, work relationship, love, the proof of love, but also dream relationship. And they were ordinary women. So Parca was talking about everyday women. In the book I wrote recently, I asked myself and the women who participate in my survey similar question about, for example, education and studies, career and work, family, sex, health, women visibility, politics, but also leisure time. And this is exactly what we need for this conversation today. And in particular, what do you read in your leisure time? Just to let you know a little bit more on top of having collecting data from the survey, I was lucky enough also to be able to interview well-known experts, scholars, writers, politicians in the area of gender equality and in the area of women's studies and gender studies in Italy. Among them also Professor Adalgisa Giorgio, who is here today, and writer Francesca Giannone, who I will mention later. Before giving you the data, I want to give you some more context about the data. Many of the 400 women who actually replied to the survey complain about the fact that we do not study enough material written by women at school and university. This applies to all subjects, not only literature, but also STEM subject or history or art history. And one in particular wrote in the survey this sentence: women are completely absent from school textbook. The message that get across is that only men exist. Then you came across Matilde of Canossa, Elizabeth I, and the numbers don't add up. And in fact, outside the textbook, well, women do exist. There is actually a lot of research that scholars have done on women's studies in general, and more on women's writing for this talk today. Here you can see on my PowerPoint the covers of some well-known scholars who have actually worked on important topics, also that will speak after me. Serena Todesco with her book on Sicilian women writers, Alessandra Trevisan, her book on Goliarda Sapienza, but also Maria Morelli, who I have seen in the audience somewhere, about queering gender in Italian women's writing, or Tiziana De Rogatis, who wrote an important book on women's writing. So when I interview Professor Giorgio about why we are not studying women's writing enough at school and university, she made a very articulated, long answer. She gave me a long and articulated answer, but I have some extract here. And in fact, she said, our society are still deeply patriarchal. But then she added, and I have translated this into English for those of you who want to look at the original you have on the other side. Whether social, political, and cultural organization is in the hands of men or women, of women change very little if women are conditioned to think that social cultural structure and institution are neutral, and or that are the only way to have a voice is to erase the feminine tone of their own voice. And she sums up with saying, women's writing in Italian school and university is a victim of the same process. And she's echoed actually also by other scholars in the book. So how Italian women have reacted over the year to these circumstances? What they have done? Mostly they went and looked for material by themselves. So they went and read women's writing outside the traditional context. For example, one of my participants in the survey said, we mostly read novels written by men. I also remember those from English and French literature, but still male authors. Later on, I read everything by Natalia Ginsburg. There was a bookstore near my workplace, and I used to go there to look for things to read. So they attempt to look into materials that actually wasn't offered at school or university. Of course, there are many exceptions, and many of us teaching women's writing are the exception, but we are talking about the norm and the canon. The issue, as this series of workshops and conferences you have organized over the year, is that we do have structural issue in the industry, in institution and place of knowledge. So it's a very wide topic. And in fact, from the survey, one academic in particular told us about her story, and I think she makes the point precisely with this point. What should we women do to be considered as capable as a man if we are working hard, achieve excellent results, and perhaps even more than the man in question? I have published 7 books, more than some full professor in my department, with excellent publishing houses. And yet it was not enough. Someone even had the nerve to tell me to my face that I should have chosen better publisher. And she adds, better according to what patriarchal criteria? Better because the editorial boards include other male full professors who deal with man's topic. So I think she makes the point very clearly. Now that you have some background, I can show you the data from the survey. 400 women more or less participated in the survey. They replied to 50 questions in total, so all of them open answers. So I gave them the possibility not to reply to all of them. So if you don't see a total final number, it's because some of them have actually skipped the question. But you can see that 200 of them said that in their spare time prefer to read fiction, 119 essay, 15 technical text, 26 poetry, 21 magazine, and 3 said that they do not read any type of text. Looking at the survey more carefully, names of writers and books come up. And among them, one of the most mentioned is this book, The Letter Carrier, in Italian, La Porta Lettere, by Francesca Giannone, who was a winner of the Bancarella Prize in 2023. The book was translated into over 40 countries, so almost 40 languages, and also in English. And this is a novel about the first post-woman in a small Italian town in the south. When the name of Francesca Giannone came up in the survey several times, I asked Francesca Giannone for an interview, and I was hoping to get it, but I was not sure. But she was very enthusiastic about this project, and she gave me some interesting answer. I took the opportunity to actually ask her if there was any link between Gabriella Sparca's work and her novels. On top of the Letter Carrier, Francesca Giannone also published Domani, Tomorrow, and she's about to publish Gli anni in bianco e nero, literally the years in black and white. I'm not too sure how this will be translated into English, but literally this is the translation. And she revealed to me that she deeply loved Parca's book. And sometimes she go back and look at them. And when she read Parca's book, Italian Women Confess, she feel a deep anger at the way a male-oriented, dominated society forced women to exist. And this come out very clearly from her novels, because she often writes about female characters who free themselves from the patriarchal society in the context they inhabit, and with the limited possibility they may have. Another writer that come up often is Aurora Tameggio, who wrote A Woman's Last Name, Il cognome delle donne, once again a winner of the Bancarella Prize. They were published by 2 different publishers, but they were both winner of the Bancarella Prize. Another story set in south of Italy, in Sicily, and a family saga centered on women. For those of you who are very curious to learn more, other novels that come up often are On the Mother's Side, Da parte di madre, by Federica De Paulis, Quello che so di te, What I Know About You, by Nadia Terranova, but also The Hungry Hearts of Girls, Il cuore affamato delle ragazze, by Maria Rosa Cutrufelli. And finally, from the survey, talking about what do you read today, what do you read in your spare time, there's an interesting quote from a participant which plainly say, I am not interested in what certain men have to say about certain topics. In fact, I find it boringly bourgeois to cultivate a type of classical culture just because that's how it is supposed to be done. I go to listen to what women have to say. it's they who, for centuries, have not been followed, read, or represented. I look for the material that was missing from my education. That's it. So the topic I try to focus on at the beginning of the presentation, the fact that education at school and university lack women's visibility, come up once again at the end of this presentation about the choice of what Italian women read today. So I hope I was able to give you a little bit of context about the book and some notion about the data. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Grazie a te. I know I definitely have lots of new books now that I'll have to put on my to-read list. So thank you so much for that. And we will swiftly move on. And if you don't mind, I will introduce our next two speakers together as they are sharing the conclusions that they will impart with us. And then I'll introduce each of the other two speakers individually. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Serena Todesco, who's an independent researcher and co-organizer with Alessandra Trevisan of the CCWW seminar series, The Grain of Her Voice, Women Writers and Literary Podcasts, Critical Functions and Cultural Impact, which was organized between October and November 2025, and it was highly successful. And Dr. Alessandra Trevisan, who's an adjunct professor at Ca' Foscari University of Venice and co-founder of Le Ortiche, which is an online initiative born during the COVID-19 pandemic with the aim of rediscovering and promoting reading of forgotten women artists. She is co-organizer with Serena of the series that I've mentioned on women and literary podcasts. So it's over to the two of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandra. Thanks everyone for joining us today. And thanks to the speakers who have preceded us. I've heard amazing things. Thanks to Francesca, particularly for including our works in her presentation. I really, really appreciate it. And I will ask you more about your book, definitely. We'll just take 10 minutes today. Alessandra and I, I'll just quickly go through what we were going to summarize for you today. So The Grain of Her Voice, the seminar that Sandra just mentioned, was exploring the many ways in which literary podcasts, whether they're only broadcasted on the radio or also through digital media channels, whether they bring an innovative perspective into the field of a contemporary literary criticism dedicated to Italian and international women writers. This urgency came to us in a time where radio and web podcasts have completely conceived by women are appearing as increasingly present in the public scene. We have looked into different national contexts, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Hungary. And today with Viviana and Natascha, with Viviana Fiorentino and Natascha Lusenti, we'll have a bit of a sample of what we were discussing throughout the seminar series. So, as literary scholars of Italian contemporary women writers, both Alessandra and I have been dealing with the theme of the female voice in literature several times. Though in distinct ways, we have examined the role of women writers' live voices in order to bring an innovative gaze onto their writing experience. So we thought that to connect different mechanisms of creation and production of podcasts could help us explore the process behind by highlighting single significant experiences, retrievals, and scholarly analysis. And Alessandra, to you.
Thank you. Hello to everyone. We have been dealing with open, wide questions, such as how feminist literary theories became part of a literary podcast dedicated to women's narrative and or biographies, what are the best practices, and what tend instead to become problematic choices in terms of contemporary divulging strategies connected with podcast storytelling, as well as with the different processes of digital and social sharing. How is the idea of authorship affected by this phenomenon? It is possible to popularize feminist literary theories and or ideologies through a podcast, and what can be lost or gained in this process, and what are possible risks. And what could be the elements, narrative, methodological, that show possible connections between intermediality and transmediality?
Along with other guests throughout the seminar series, both Alessandra and I presented our own focus, which was Una come lei. It's a literary series and digital archive started in Bologna in 2018 by Anna Franceschini and Roberta Sireno. We were illustrating during our seminar session how Una come lei provides an ongoing intimate space for female subjectivity seeking voice, while representing feminist activism, responding to gynocriticism, and becoming a space of co-creation of experience. So basically, the podcast archive that Franceschini and Sireno created has allowed for an oral reception dynamic based on listening, exchange, and reciprocity, which nicely ties in with the concept of community, of course. Based on a collaboration with different partners, the digital archive has allowed many Italian women poets, and we all know how poetry gets to be marginalized all the time. So they were gaining a space of remediation, while the interaction between authorship and digital content produced a negotiated authorship, because a community of listeners and readers was involved and still is involved in the events organized by the digital archive. And in this way, those voices are heard, remembered, reutilized in the public space, both online and through live performances. So basically, what we were arguing during our presentation was that these the practice of interactive archive involves feminist entrustment, a form of entrustment to orality and performativity. And of course, women's voices, we all think of Carvarero with the reference to resonance, confirms how the materiality of voice, and I'm quoting Linda Fisher here, is an identity trait of agency.
These indeed political questions remain open to debate and urge to us to expand the scope of what a literary podcast can entail. In order not to use up too much time, we will just outline a few ideas which will certainly benefit from this roundtable. One main issue concerns the visibility of authors featured in a certain podcast. What will be the criteria meant to assign that right angle to contents being presented? And this question deals with the transversal nature of a podcast. One may cite as examples the use of podcasts by major radio channels aimed at rediscovering famous classics. However, what about lesser-known authors that remain outside of the canon? Can the podcast indeed be part of an authentic recognition that lasts over time?
Another aspect which we would like to raise today is the possibility to feature minor genre in which women often thrive. These genres still remaining pretty unknown to a greater audience, and I would like to mention only how Alberica Bazzoni and Alice Parrinello during our seminar series presented a series of interviews they entertained with female comic artists and graphic novel artists. So in that case, what is the actual political weight of a podcast? And a theme that has also remained widely unexplored, yet came through during the final roundtable, is the capacity for the podcast writer, creators, producers even, to involve different kinds of audience and generations, especially if one wishes to integrate podcast into schoolwork as part of the didactic materials. So there's another issue at hand there.
Yes, and along with the intergenerational targets, a crucial issue that came through was money. We all know that cultural work, especially if done by women, frequently is taken for granted and risks remaining highly underpaid, if not directly exploited for free. We spoke about this with Giovanna Iorio. Therefore, in the case of podcasts, we would like to relaunch the idea that dealing with podcasts means to deal with the sheer fact that there are contents that are more profitable than others are. And this factor definitely directs and shapes the way that the market of culture moves around the creation of contents, which may also mean that some topics remain unexplored due to their being not fashionable enough.
And finally, there was one idea suggested by Professor Adalgisa Giorgio during our final roundtable. That was the idea that deals with the subtle presence of the book inside the podcast, which by definition pushes one to listen and not to read a text. Yet the original book is never detached from the podcast narrative, which is apparently a banal fact, but this implies the existence of a sort of narrative authoritativeness that may unite in an original way newer kinds of communities around the same work of art and or idea. And I think a beautiful example remains in our view, the podcast Mamma Mia, created by Natascha Lusenti, who is going to talk shortly after us, who centers a narration on mother-daughter bonds by tracing connections between real-life experiences and excerpts from a different book by women writers. We shall stop here in order to give time to our colleagues and friends to tell their presentation. And we just hope that this very brief excursus has offered more paths to explore. I would really, really like to thank, and Alessandra with me, the CCWW for having us and for supporting our seminar series, Professor Giorgio and Professor Darotsky, and Natascha Lusenti and Viviana Fiorentino, who have accepted to be with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was brilliant and so much, wonderful and so much food for thought. And if you want, once we get to the Q&A, I can put in the chat for you the link to the series so that people can go back and have a look at what you also have the recordings, don't you, from the series that have gone up, so people can go in and engage with those. So we'll put those in the chat once we are at the Q&A stage. And it is my pleasure to introduce Viviana Fiorentino to you, writer, translator, and co-founder of Le Ortiche. She is currently doing a PhD in poetry at the Seamus Heaney Centre at the Queen's University in Belfast. She is author of 2 books of poetry and a novel. Her poetry in English is featured on RTÉ 1's and archived in UCD's Irish Poetry Reading Archive. Her translation work includes Italian editions of Frida Lofton, and also an essay with translations in a monograph dedicated to Anne Carson. And we'll hear more about her work shortly. Thank you so much, Viviana. Viviana, we can't hear you. There we go.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really delighted to be here. Incredibly interesting thoughts so far. So today I'm going to discuss a project of rediscovery through translation, Frida Lofton's A Transitory House. This is a book and an author that have been largely forgotten. And I believe that this particular project tells us something about reception, community building, and the bridge between academia, archives, and the general public. And if you want, my talk would like to be to answer this question: how does it happen that a book that is usually unread is read? So I initiated this project in the context of our work at Le Ortiche, an Italian collective of 5 women and scholars, authors and scholars. And we are committed to discovering forgotten female writers, especially those of the 20th century, and making their work accessible to the public. So translation is one of our primary methods, alongside the interviews, podcasts, songs, collective readings, video narrations, visual art, and so on. And our work is a way of archiving not only the rediscovered text of forgotten women, but also the creative responses of the modern readership. So you can see an example of these on our website and SoundCloud channel. In particular, our podcast Fest, Volume 1 and 2, features people from all over the world reading the works of these reclaimed voices. Frida Lofton's poetry was rediscovered around 2015 by researcher Emma Penny and Professor Lucy Collins at University College of Dublin. And despite their scholarly work and rediscover, there was no modern re-edition of Lawton's poetry, and she remained unknown to the wider public for far too long, I would say. So my bilingual edition with the original text and my Italian translations represent the first contemporary reprint of Lawton's poetry. This publication serves a dual function. It brings lost literary histories to light while prompting reflection on the cultural traditions that led to the neglect of this writing in the first place. It seeks to challenge the cultural silence surrounding women's writing, specifically during the 20th century, but also today, by introducing it to new readers in new locations. So in this case, moving from Ireland to Italy. Frida Lawton was a poet of, in the words of Lucy Collins, a poet of unusual daring, of an unflinching view of the joy and grief at the center of an intimate life. Her exclusion from the Irish poetic canon reminds us of the need to question gender bias and critical reception. At the time A Transitory House was published, she was accused of confronting non-poetic topics, such as female desire and sexuality. For a decade or more, Lawton's poetry found a place within the Irish tradition, but her investigation of difficult subjective states was in many ways ahead of its time, challenging the readers of her time to accept the women as both the authors and subject matter of dark and revelatory work. So renewed engagement with this poetry does not necessarily require new methodologies, but it does insist that we interpret our existing approaches more expansively. So in this context of my work with Il Ortique, Alessandra, Trevisan and I collaborated with the musician Solar Prex on a project called The Transitory for Frida Lawton, and this was an album inspired by Lawton's poetry and its Italian translations. And I invite you to listen to it in the SoundCloud page here. We also created a series of podcasts featuring readings of Lawton's poetry in translation. And these initiatives brought Lawton's poetry to new readers, but also listeners. So relocating her work in a space of listening that, if you want, is a territory of independence. And this expanded the reception community across the generations and demographics as well. Those who accessed the album and podcast were international and were not necessarily people primarily interested in poetry. So to give you a few more examples, we organized events in Italy and Ireland where we presented the video and audio readings. And this was an opportunity to engage in a live debate about Lawton's work and let to her poems be a vessel for intercultural exchange. So during these events, we also feature live music performance and conversation with scholars and poetry editors. For example, Renata Moresi was one of these. And the goal was to view Lawton's poetry through different perspectives, coming from different voices and bodies. And during another event in Palermo, in Sicily, young women and drama students from a secondary school were invited to read Lawton's poetry. And this was particularly moving as it brought together an audience of different generations and backgrounds. And since Lawton's work reflects on the female body and resists norms of a female representation, hearing it interpreted by young women today provides its potential as a liberating model for current and future generations of women and poets. What I found most beautiful in this project was that we transmitted these poems not only in the author's voice, but through the styles, accent, inflection of different cultures and backgrounds. So once a poem is in the world and no longer within the poet's body, it becomes musical material for the voices and bodies of others who wish to welcome it. So translating and transposing these works into music, audio, and shared readings was an attempt of reinventing a readership for Lawton's poetry, moving her poetry to a different geography, a different culture, opening to a non-academic audience. And I'd like to finish by connecting these to my own experience as a poet. So in early 2026, Alessandra and I participated in Versopolis 2026, the European Review of Poetry, Books and Culture, with a project titled The Other Woman, Frida and I. And this performance project is a dialogue between my own writing, Alessandra singing, and the works of Frida Lawton. So developed within a framework of the poetics of care, it represents literary recovery as a radical act of repair. It resists historical erasure through intimacy and deep listening, tending to neglected voices as a form of kinship that transcends time. And by integrating text and voice with electronic experimentation, we offer a restoration of memory that functions as structural support for a more resilient community. And this work wants to be an act of tenderness and a vital resistance against the fragmentation of the present. And that's me, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Viviana. What wonderful images you've conjured up for us, linking poetry to music, and I could see so many links with Helen's presentation. So thank you so much. And our last but not least speaker is Natascha Lusenti, who's a Rai Radio 2 speaker, journalist, author, and TV host. So over to you. Natascha, you're on mute. No, still on. Yeah, that's fine. Whilst Natascha's preparing, I can share with you in the chat the SoundCloud link for the project that Viviana was talking about. And also the link for the series that Serena and Alessandra organized, because you've got a wonderful list of speakers, themes, and a great bibliography as well if you wanted to follow up on any of the themes. Natascha, do you reckon you need to log on and log off again, or? Yeah, so do you mind if we take maybe a question, and when you go back in, just give us a shout and we'll circle back to you. Excellent. Good. So I'll keep an eye on that, and just allow me to say thank you so much to all the presenters again. As you could tell, I definitely sent emails about the timekeeping, and they were not excellent, more than excellent on that. So thank you so much for making my job so easy. A bit of housekeeping as well. If you don't want your picture to sort of appear in the recording, then just turn off your camera and put the question in the chat. So anybody want to go first with a question for one of our speakers? I'm not abusing my role as a chairperson. Can be written, or let's see if anybody's put a hand up, or you can just turn your microphone on and ask the question. Yes, Eliana, go for it. Thank you so much.
Hi, Sandra. Sorry, my line just has frozen for a couple of seconds. So I just want to make sure that you're asking the audience whether we have questions. Is that right? As I don't want to, thank you so much to everyone. It's been really exciting and fascinating. And I have questions for everyone, but let's just ask one question and let's see, who wants to answer, or perhaps, give us, different perspectives. It seems like then one of the common threads, or at least to me, is, the power of the female voice, from a physical, really tangible perspective. And it's also something that I'm working on and I'm reflecting on at the moment. So I loved, for example, Viviana's presentation, but also Serena's presentation and Francesca. They all interweave, or they have, in my opinion, interwoven this concept of the power of the female voice into, their presentation and their work. Specifically, I'm interested in, the physicality as something that releases power and also empowers others. And so it's not really a question. It's just like, would you like to respond to my comment? Anyone? Thank you.
Sorry, thank you so much, Eliana. Can I just jump in, as Natascha's been able to log back on? So if we give time to the speakers to think about this comment or question.
Great.
I'm so sorry. No worries. It's over to Natascha, and then we start with the comment or question that Eliana posed to the others. Okay?
I'm so sorry. I switched to the phone because my computer, I don't know what happened to it. Anyway, thank you for having me. I'm really very excited and thrilled about everything that I heard. And actually, I would like to start from a couple of words that Eliana said. She said interwoven, and she said physicality. And I think my podcast is about both things. I am, as you said, Sandra, I am a radio host for the public national broadcast in Italy, RAI. I've been a voice of the second channel for like 13 years now, and I always work in the morning shows. So this is important because it's a special place. It's a very intimate place compared to other like afternoon shows, for example. And I built through the years relationship with listeners, particularly with the women listeners. And I told stories about my life, in a feminist way, so in a political way, when it's needed to talk about topics. When I worked for TV, I never thought that I would do something like that. And radio, in this sense, like liberated me. And I always start my show with a little tale that I write. It's the only written part. It's like a very short story, 1 minute and a half, 2 minutes story that I read. And then the channel, the radio posts it on their social profile. So 3 years ago, I wrote this thing about me becoming for some little things like my mom. For example, I understand that I eat a lot of salad. She used to eat a lot of salad when I was a kid. And I was talking also about a Guardian article in which the journalist interviewed some people about this topic, becoming like your mother, becoming like your grandmother, or doing things, doing a hobby that your grandmother used to have in order to feel her close to you now that she's not here anymore. A lot of women wrote to me on the post, on Facebook especially, like 300 women. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to make a podcast out of it. And the RAI accepted, and they didn't pay me a lot, but it was okay. But they gave me the space on the platform, on the digital platform connected to the broadcast. And the podcast is organized in 4 different episodes, 15 minutes each. And I built it in an interwoven, it's a polyphony, it's a my voice only telling the story, because I believe in the physicality of voices. I believe in in the use of voice as an instrument. And so I think if you're not a professional, perhaps you might have a wonderful story, but not the best of voices. And I wanted to have one voice only, but the stories were hundreds, because I put together all the things that these women wrote to me, talking about mostly their dead mother and how they accepted that they, in small or bigger ways, they became like them. And for example, in gardening, or for example, in cooking, the receipt that the mother was good at, and that also they talked about forgiveness, that they getting an age, they understood their mothers better. So the mother-daughter bond is a very important thing for me. And I write a lot about it. I think a lot about it. And this podcast gave me the opportunity to build a feminist space where hundreds of women talked about this. And I talked about my relationship with my mother when it was interesting. And I also interweaved all of this with books. For example, She Came from Mariupol, from Natascha Rodin, or Annie Ernaux, or a lot of other books where the author talks about her relationship with her mom. And so it was very, very moving to write it. Very liberating also, and it has the power of putting together stories and voices of women, and where there is not a voice that predominates. We're all together, and it's like we're all together, really all together, talking about something that matters about our mother-daughter bond. And actually, now I'm working on a book, a sort of memoir about that. So I say this just because, like Serena was saying, podcasts and books are very linked together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natascha. That's wonderful and so touching, and made me think about my own relationship with my mother and some of the things that we exchange. So I'm just going to I think that's the right link that I've just put in the chat so that people can access your podcast as well. If you want, now you can use the chat if you want, because it's no longer sort of pinging for speakers. So if you want to share any of the links, Helen's shared loads of links with us. So please use the chat as a resource. And now I'm going to go back to Serena, Alessandra, and Francesca to respond to Eliana. Or whoever wants, not just them. Right.
I just wanted to say something very, very quickly connected with the physicality of the voice, because it's all connected with what Alessandra was mentioning relating money, the presence of women in cultural work, and what this entails in terms of how are women profitable for these kind of projects like podcasts or beautiful websites and archives like Le Ortique. And what Francesca was saying, on the other hand, when she was mentioning Gabriella Parca and how things have been changing. I mean, Francesca is very kind. She's a friend. She's a brilliant colleague. And she's been giving us value today by mentioning our books and our ideas. And we all worked in networks in the past, and we still have things going on. But it's still, this is a community already. But if any of us publishes anything that credits part of our work and then goes out in the world, it's still perceived, and we were talking about this with Alessandra yesterday, so it's very spontaneous. I'm just, it's not very easy to make it go through the academic wall, if you know what I mean. It's very difficult to make people understand that we're not doing this because we're part of academia. I'm not part of academia. I do things that I do, or choose to translate a poet, to organize or collaborate with a festival, or to organize or participate in a conference, because I like what I do. And that's very banal to say, but not many people seem to see that. If you are in the public space and you work with beautiful social projects like I didn't know anything about Jenny Hartley, and I'm definitely going to look into that. But this is something that has an impact, and maybe it can cross boundaries. But I'm not really sure whether the fact that women are more and more visible in academia, if that can be a plus for their voices to come through. I'm not criticizing, I'm just asking myself, where is this going to, is this really going to give us the value that we all deserve? So I'm answering Eliana with another question, basically, so apologize for that.
No worries. I think it's important to ask those questions, especially, you know, those of us who have the good fortune and the privilege and the luck to be in academia, because sometimes it is luck, you know, to see how is it that our work translates and can cross boundary into what in the UK we call public engagement, but, you know, how we can sort of go past that ivory tower. I guess reading is, and the love of the, you know, when you were saying I do these things, that I know that you do them, you know, for the love of the text as well. And we rarely, you know, necessarily sort of in academia speak about just the love of the text.
Sandra, can I add something?
Of course, yes, please, Francesca.
Eliana, ciao. Thanks for the idea you share with us. And I wanted just to follow up about the point that Serena was making. If we think about completely redesign the structure in a feminist way, it also means, and this is an important point for me, not only as an academic, but as a person, to act together. There's no individual feminism. I think we may have mentioned this point in one of the past occasion, maybe when the postcard series was actually on. But there's no one single person that can be in charge of recreating the structure. So what's the point about navigating all by ourselves in the mission we do have? Could be the postcard, or could be academia, or could be radio, or whatever we do in our everyday work and life. One important point is also to put together all this voice together and give visibility and credits, because one of the issues we continue to have in academia is that despite now we have many works done, we have done work, still they don't come across. And I think it's also our task to make the materials available, visible in the context when we can. Maybe a large audience like the one Natascha may have, or a small class like the one I may have, but at least make it visible and help that materials and that work done going through. Just a comment.
Thank you so much. The chat is very rich with links, so thank you so much for everybody for sharing. I will abuse my position in that case, just to get people thinking if I'm allowed. And I had a question for Adalgisa, hand up, go for it.
Sandra, I can wait, and you go. Sure? You go first. Yes.
It's just that it struck me as both Natascha was speaking as well as Helen, that there's this sort of link, and obviously we know that there is, but it was just sort of brought forward between reading and writing, and kind of reading and then engaging in creative practice. And I was wondering, Jenny, a question, if with the groups that you've worked in prisons, whether with men or women, whether reading has led to any other creative outcomes, be it writing or music or anything like that.
There are creative writing projects in prisons which are wonderful, and various different examples of where they have led I can think of. Particularly, we were doing Macbeth over several months, and one guy rewrote the first scenes of Macbeth, and you know, I couldn't understand them because they were in his sort of gang. I don't know what they were, but they were wonderful. And when it was a Valentine's Day, one of the officers said, "Why didn't you?" This is in a men's prison. Why didn't you write Valentine poems? So, you know, they come spontaneously, though. So organic, I would say. I'm not a creative writing teacher, so I don't. But of course, it's wonderful, and it just shows their engagement. Prisoners like to write poetry, and in the Inside Time newspaper I showed you, they have columns of poetry. You know, it's quite interesting how traditional it is. They like to rhyme. And I do poems, as I always end the session with a poem. And to begin with, we're very suspicious. And somebody said to me, is this like a prayer? Because they're quite suspicious of maybe, you know, if you've got religious secrets. I mean, it's okay to be overt, but, you know, not maybe secret. And no. And so, yes, so reading matter does extend their idea of what they can write. I wouldn't do it formally because that's not my training. But yeah, there is that wonderful crossover. And when we were doing Down and Out in Paris and London, you know, the Orwell. So in fact, there was a to and fro with the Orwell Prize people, and people submitted wonderful. You know, you could imagine there were some very personal experiences that. Yeah, so there's some wonderful extensions, yes, that happen in that way. Mm.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jenny. And we've got raised hands from Adalgisa and then from Helena.
Okay. Actually, what I was going to ask is similar to what Sandra has asked, but I will expand a tiny bit, and please excuse the chaos I have in my head, because I have lots and lots of ideas and I don't know how to structure them. So I'll try and say something that makes sense. So both, if I understand the podcasts, and I'm very sorry that since the series, I still have not made any progress in listening to many of these podcasts. It seems that the physical presence of the body in traditional reading groups has been replaced by voice. But there is also the issue that the podcast, one listens them in solitude, if I understand correctly, because you listen when you can, when you want, and then whatever reaction you have, or even writing, or maybe recording something for the others to listen, is done by itself, by yourself, and not in a group. Whereas the beauty, I think, of groups that Jenny has organized, and also Helen, is that there is still the physical presence. And I presume that actually for prisoners to come together in a group is very important. And how, I wonder whether Jenny and Helen can talk about this process of, as Helen has called, from solitude to solidarity or to community, how you have observed this and what you can see that happens there in terms of creating a community. And also maybe if you have, I don't know if you have time to ask to say all these things, this concept of care to develop a bit more, and also what kind of criticism people do actually in a group, you know, prisoners or people who are, you know, in a particular, in a factory, for example, may do, which may, you know, put forward, which I'm sure is very different from the stuff that we talk about. Thank you. Sorry if it's really chaotic.
I think Helen should go first because I've already had a go. Helen, I want to hear.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a really kind of good angle to come in with the sort of, where does the sort of solitude, like where do people kind of find a lot of connection in physical presence, because obviously reading is often something we do alone, first of all. I've also found it really interesting listening to everyone and thinking as well about how there's been this sort of real combination of sort of voice and reading as something spoken. I don't know. I think it varies. I noticed that I think in some spaces, if you have people who are used to listening to podcasts, it would be quite easy for them not to come along to the book group and just, for example, or maybe even listen in online at home. You know, like someone even here, I don't know, in this call might have, you know, put their camera off and just started, I don't know, making a cup of tea or whatever. But then people who I think really want to kind of have that physical connection, it is quite important then to sort of be all together. I think it depends on the subject as well. And I guess I can speak a bit to kind of the queer LGBTQ plus space. I think what I noticed a lot is that you would have kind of serial kind of absences, like people who would come to the first group and then slowly admit that actually they don't really, most of the time, they're quite happy just sort of reading on their own and coming every 6 months along to the book group, but being part of the space, even the digital space, like the WhatsApp group, so that they could receive the follow-up. Like if you kind of like summarize, like some of us might love the email Sandra will inevitably write us all, you know, with all the links and we can, I think some people like that kind of idea of coming in a bit and the physical presence is maybe not something they need as much. But then I think for some people, for example, working with more isolated people who perhaps haven't encountered that kind of community before, like they kind of want to come along and see what it's like, you know, and actually creating the space. I think that would be a nice moment to pass over to Jenny, you know, making sure you create a safe space in which people feel like they can open up and talk. Because you can also invite people to a space and they will stay very quiet if you run it like a school classroom, or I think, yeah, Jenny, you said that earlier, you really try to kind of put education off the agenda.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's so interesting. Absolutely. And I was just thinking, how do we make sure that it is a different sort of space? Partly it's the volunteer coming in, so it's a new person, but also I think as much as we can, I know it sounds trivial, but we always have refreshments. So it's like tea and biscuits. And like, I think many reading groups that people belong to, you have that, don't you? So it creates this sort of social space. So we know we're in this hour will be different. You talk for a bit, then you have some, something to eat and drink, and then you talk for a bit. And I know it sounds trivial, but it actually curates. And I think your thing about the framework of care, and I've never used the word care about what we do, and I'm now just seeing, of course it's that. Why did I not see it? Because I'm an academic, I focus on the books and what we read. But it is exactly about what we, and if someone doesn't turn up, where is he, all that stuff. And you can't press it too much because there'll be horrible reasons, whatever. But, and as for that other question that Alessandra raised about how do they speak, of course they talk. That's what I like. When we did the Iliad, we had a group that wanted to read the classics. Somebody got hold of a great books list, great books I must read before, whatever. So we worked our way through some classics, and they were doing, I can't remember if it was the Odyssey or the Iliad. And somebody just comes bursting and he says, they don't eat any vegetables. And I would never, in academic context, you would never say anything like that. And it's just so great. And of course it'll go else, but they will take discussions wherever they want, it's great. They know, I think it's quite, what you learn is not to disclose, how to, you don't want to disclose too much. And I think that's the thing in all reading groups, is you learn the level of disclosure or sharing that you want to, you're comfortable with. And I think it's a sort of soft skill, isn't it? And I think that's something really useful. They learn things, but I think it's more about, I think this thing of care is, and you wouldn't think to say that about these groups, but I think that is what's going on to some extent. I don't want to get yeah. No, I think that's really interesting.
Thank you so much. And can I just say that I remember in your book, Jenny, which I highly recommend to everybody, that was one of the things, wasn't it, that sort of drew all of the reading groups that you surveyed together, or quite a lot of them, was the food, the fact that they were also sharing some form of drink or food or something like that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Even I would say even the men, but actually the men were more elaborate. Some of them anyway. But yes, I think it's it is sort of symbolic. It's civilizing, isn't it? That this is an hour we'll spend having, we'll raise our game a bit, put it that way. Which is what they do. Yeah.
Thank you. Helena.
Hi there. Thank you so much for everyone. It's been really interesting to hear you speak about your practices. I have a question, basically, for a bit of context. I'm from an organisation called New Writing North, and we are a literature development organisation in the northeast of England, and we are opening a centre for writing in publishing in the northeast in a couple of years, which obviously we want to get physical bodies in, and we want to develop in-person physical communities around that. But we have noticed, obviously, with the pandemic, and there was obviously everyone had to move online for their writing events, their book events. And in your opinions, the speakers that have spoken about podcasts and digital like lecture series, etc., what do you think the benefits are there of focusing and developing those digital communities as well as the in-person, or like instead of the in-person communities? Do you think there are particular benefits to doing more events or community settings online or digitally? I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Go for it, James.
Yeah. So we've given it quite a bit of thought. It's mostly about accessibility, to be honest, because even whether there's a pandemic or not, many buildings have staircases and they have reasons that might intimidate people or might make them inaccessible for people. So having things online or having things hybrid, at least, suddenly opens the whole thing up to people who might feel self-conscious even, or may just be physically unable to join you. And for us, for our book club, we wanted to make it like the subject matter really lends itself to being worldwide. So because it's translated literature. So having it online meant that we could have a truly global audience, which we couldn't have had if it was purely people who happened to be able to come to our building.
Thank you so much. Margarita, is it a question or a comment in relation to Helena's question?
Sorry, it is a comment and a question. Well, it's a comment, in fact, because I have been listening to you all very enthusiastically, because I also have a book club that I started last year, and I was someone passed me this on. And I thought, wow, that's what I want to hear, really. And in fact, it is probably more like James's, because it is a hybrid of an academic thing, or it started in academia then. But instead of asking people to come to us, we went out. So there's a group of students and me who made the book club in the local library. So we went there and asked for a space, and now we meet every month in the library in Braga, Portugal. And it's the type of the profile of the people that attend is very much like James's, like retirees, it's true, but all sorts of different people, and also people that come from other departments in the academia, like mathematics or engineering, and come and join us. So it's a very diverse group. And we're still, it's very nice to hear you speaking about all. I think that the sense of solidarity is very important. So I recognize all these things as also in my experience of the book club. Thank you for your communications and presentations.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. And it's so good to know that we've crossed so many boundaries with the reading club. I don't know if anybody else from the speakers wanted to sort of jump in on Helena's question. And Helena, if there's any links you want to share with us about your initiative, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Yeah, for a bit more context, we do hybrid events. It was more speaking to like developing sort of organic conversations outside of those, and yeah, how those communities, if there's any like marginalized communities that sort of feel like they're more able to access, literature buildings, which are seen as sometimes a bit elite, and we don't want that to happen. We want everyone to be involved. So I wondered if anyone had any thoughts around, other things like the cultural criticism, podcasts, book kind of reviews, Natascha's radio show. That was really interesting to hear about as well. Sorry, I'll let anyone.
Right. I mean, I know what people do here in Bath, for example. Sometimes it's cafe, like Helen mentioned, but also they've gone to pubs, so kind of sort of taking over, places in pubs where they do cultural events, not necessarily reading clubs. It could be other sort of presentations, sort of taking them out of the university campus. But here in Bath, they do work better outside just because of where the campus is. It's a bit sort of further away, so getting people up there, but in more sort of unsuspecting places like pubs or cafes. And I've got more experience in museums, so that's what I can tell you a bit more about.
I could also add a bit to that. Helena, I think it's really good to hear that you've got 2 years also to plan this. Like, what an amazing period of time to kind of think through everything. I think in a bit, certainly when we've been thinking about our event series at ILCS, we're at Senate House, so it's pretty central London, which is on the one hand great because everyone can get there, but at the same time not great because not everyone can get there. It's very expensive if you live outside of London, and even if you live on the fringes of London. So I think sometimes thinking about how you can make the walls of the university or like literary spaces more permeable is really important. And I think, as Sandra said, a lot of book clubs, and as Jenny said, they often involve some kind of food or refreshment, and some people come for that pint at the end, or the cakes in between, halfway through. So you might think about, I don't know, kind of like events around maybe those events in more sort of traditional literary institutions. Have a kind of like you could have like kind of an open day at the institution that you want to hold the event in, or you could do things around. Like I remember going to a really good reading group at SOAS that was actually set in a cafe at the edge of Russell Square, which it was actually once where Emmeline Pankhurst lived with some of her daughters. And it's really nice because you're kind of like in this cafe and you find out this history. And I think maybe also if you know about the demographic coming to you, you can maybe think about also spaces within the vicinity, that might have like local history or heritage that hooks people in. And then, you could develop, I think it'd be then interesting to develop podcast series or anything. Actually, there's a really interesting project that I will put in the chat. Got 1,000 words for belonging, which, I think is a really great example of blending podcast, and also there was like a poetry book interested and concerned about how English is kind of a forced language in schools. And not celebrating more native languages. So I'll put that in the chat if you want to check it out, because I think that is so multimedia, and yeah, I can't wait to see what they do next, actually.
Thank you so much. No worries if you haven't downloaded it, because I'm saving the chat, and then when we send it around to everybody, you'll have the links in the chat. We are sort of at 5 p.m., but I don't want to sort of stop if there's any kind of pressing question or any sort of thoughts or comments. There we go, Manu.
Hi, thank you. Apologies if this has already been addressed. I've been popping in and out with childcare, but I'm an academic at Glasgow, and I'm working on a project looking at representations of childbirth in French and English fiction, and I'm hoping to set up reading groups for women, postnatal women. And I just wondered whether anyone had experiences of engaging people who don't have English as their first language. So I'm thinking like there's a large migrant community in Glasgow, and it might not be the obvious choice to use books to engage them. So yeah, that's my question.
I would imagine, Helen, you've got quite a bit of experience with ESOL, don't you? You want to share a bit of that? But also Viviana, absolutely.
Yeah, I can just very quickly say there's a very easy way around that, which is amazing, which is that there are, and I will find a link to it now as well, maybe while Viviana's answering. You can find lots of books that have audio accompaniment that are bilingual, multilingual. Those resources aren't always that readily available. But depending on the languages you want to work with, you can look for, I'll share this in a second. You can look for platforms that make books available in multiple languages. It might not be all the languages of everyone in your classroom, but you can also look for Penguin Easy Readers, or Jenny mentioned a different version. There are lots of, all the big publishing houses have their own version, but they're really, really accessible. Sometimes they can be extremely simple, almost like a comic strip, with key vocabulary, and then you can have more complex texts. So going from literally pre-A1 to C2 or C1. But yeah, that's what I'd say. And I'll try and find this link. You can check out the books. They're in lots of languages.
Thank you.
That's great. Viviana, go for it.
Yes, I led some creative writing workshops and reading groups with refugees in Northern Ireland, and my experience was very useful to look at, as actually Helen said, poems, like for each workshop, just one poem available in translation in the language of people that were joining the workshop, but also to look at poems that had more than one language in the text. So it became a sort of a game to share and try to understand, what was going on in the poem, because everyone had a piece that couldn't be understood in your own language. I mean, if the poem was, had a few words in a language that you don't know, there are bits that you don't understand, and another person can understand that bit. And so it was really enjoyable, I would say, and very well participated also.
That's such a good idea, and I might use it, if I may steal it, I might use it for my students, Viviana.
And again, had a little comment for Jenny and Helen as well, as board member, now former board member of Irish Pen. We organized a Pen Friend session to write. We usually read text of writers in prison. So it's the other way around. So the writer is in prison. We are the readers outside, reading their books. And then we gather and we write to these writers in prison. And usually these create an incredible bond with the person in prison and with the people gathering for reading and writing to these writers in prison. So there is something, poetic in a way, but also that has to do with the community when we relate with someone who is in prison. So if there is a sort of wall separating the inside and the outside, just a comment about that.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's wonderful to encourage people who are writing in prison to, and obviously they like it. And there's like the Kersler project as well, you know, where stuff gets published, which is great. It's interesting that they don't really like, people in my groups don't particularly like to read stuff that's written by people in prison. I guess they want to get out of prison when in their reading, you know, in a way. But of course, that kind of encouragement is it's really important. And we also get author visits, which are really popular. You can imagine, and authors like to come because they like to meet different sorts of readers. So that sort of breaking down the walls in that way is great too. Yeah, I know. But PEN's a wonderful organisation. I guess more for political prisoners. I guess.
Yeah. But I remember, for example, we campaigned for a Kurdish Turkish poet called Ilan Sami Shomak, who was in prison for 30 years. And then he was released. And last year we had the pleasure to have him in Ireland, in Dublin. And he said that actually in prison he read a lot of poetry of other poets or writers that were in prison. So,
fantastic. Oh, that's really nice. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I don't want to cut anybody off, so I will get, any final questions or final comments. If not, I won't rush anybody as I do this with my students. Adalgisa, go for it.
Only if we have time and we want to.
Well, we're sort of a bit over time, so but I guess the conversation is going and people are keen. So
okay.
The last question.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for giving me this privilege. It is really for Francesca and Natascha, this question. And I was going to, I'd like to ask them, what is it possible for you to tell us a bit about the socio-economic and actually educational background of the women that engage with your podcast or have engaged with your survey, Francesca? Because it seems to me, at least for Francesca, I don't know about the people who engage with the podcasts, that they are quite, have a good educational level, because they know how to find books, and they seem to know what is, bestsellers, books that are available. They go into bookshops. And is this very much different from what happened to the women that were examined by Gabriella Parca? Has there been a big difference now? Do women read a lot more? And Natascha, what kind of people engage with your the books that you actually propose and you discuss, etc.?
Adalgisa, if Natascha is fine with it, I can start in telling you briefly there's a big difference between the voices of women you can find in Gabriella Parca and the one in my book. In the chapter about education, I have data on how many of them have a degree, or how many of them have a doctorate, how many of them were able to go to school. And I can tell you that more than 30, I can't remember exactly the number, but hold a PhD who participated in the survey out of 500. But of course, those also, I can imagine that they were those mentioning certain specific readings, not only about fiction, but also essay and feminist essay. What come up very well is that reading is a privilege, and for the time, because you need to do that after work, after family commitment, and you need to afford to buy a book if you live in a town where you don't have a library where you can borrow them. This is very common in Italy. It's very different from the UK or even in the US, where it's a lot easier to go and look for community libraries where you can get some free books or with very much advantage. What was criticized about Parker's book at some point when it became quite well known was that someone said they are lettere of servants. They are the letters written by very lower class people. And what I wrote in my book is that they may be written by, questions written by lower class people. They were, I can't recall who defined them as letters by servant, but I can check briefly while Natascha will speak. That doesn't mean that the question they were posing did not interest all the other social classes, since they had no means at all to look and investigate for some points. So Adalgisa, I will leave Natascha time to speak while I'll check and tell you who says so about Parker's women.
Thank you also to Adalgisa for the question about the women that wrote to me. They are women who are listeners of Radio 2. Typically, Radio 2 is a very, for example, family thing. For example, your father used to listen to Radio 2, so the radio passes on generations, I found out, working on radio. And and it's like a leftish, I mean, like people are average educated or more than average educated. In the morning shows, though, your listeners are quite different, because you have a lot of people that, for example, work during the night, also in factories or hospitals, or also morning shows are early in the morning, so you don't have, for example, teenagers. We have, our listeners are like their age are like from 45 years old up. So typically they were women in their 50s or 60s. As I said, most of them had lost their mothers. And do they know the books I talked about? No. We have a problem in Italy. People don't read a lot. And as Francesca was saying, women read more than men, but women have more complicated lives. They have all the care jobs, not paid care jobs, and they're more tired. They have little time to read, and they are less paid. They work less, so they have little money to buy books. I talk a lot about books in my show. And very often people ask me about, or even if I don't say the title, they write to me and they want to know the title. So I spread like book culture, but no, like they knew Annie Ernaux because she won a Nobel Prize, but they didn't know Natascha Bodin or other authors that I mentioned. So I always think that I'm like a gardener, and that I put bulbs in the grass and something will happen, or no, but I still do it. And I was just wanted to say something about the language, because I've been a volunteer for creative writing or inclusive education with kids in the most poor schools of Milan. So we meet a lot of immigrants or children that were born in Italy, or children that came from other countries at 3, 4, maybe even 6, 7 years old. And last week we did a couple of hours in a school, and we often have a volunteer. She's Arabic, and of course she speaks Arab. And when we told it was I don't know how you call it in English, children of 7 years old, like second class in Italy for us, the primary school, I think. Their faces lit up when the woman who created the project said to them, "We have a teacher. She's not a teacher, but she calls them teacher. We have a teacher. She's Arabic and she speaks Arab. So the kids that don't speak well Italian will work with her." And they were really, really happy. And this because we were talking about translating and language and all of this.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you, Francesca, for adding all those details in the chat. Sort of adding to that, I saved the chat, so I'll sort of circulate it. And I saw that sort of people were sort of signing up. So this might be a good sort of time to kind of round up the workshop, but not before saying thank you to all our speakers, saying thank you to Ethna, saying thank you to Adalgisa and Claire, and to Kathy, who have all contributed in different ways to making this happen. So thank you so, so much. Enjoy the weekend, and hopefully you can enjoy the sun as well, wherever you are.